I smelled the whiskey before I even reached the porch. It was that sharp kind of smell that clings to the air like a warning, the kind that makes your stomach tighten before your mind has time to catch up. I had been gone for months, focused on training discipline early mornings, ruck marches, everything that kept me moving forward. But the second the bus pulled away and I stood on the cracked sidewalk in Rock Hill, South Carolina, the world around me felt like it slid backward into something I thought I had escaped. I walked toward the house slowly, my duffel biting into my shoulder, the July heat pressing against my uniform. I saw the curtain move, a shadow. Then my mom appeared at the door, her smile trembling at the edges. She wrapped her arms around me quick and tight. Her breath shook against my neck. "I missed you, sweetie." Her voice sounded happy, but her eyes kept flicking past me toward the living room like she was waiting for an explosion. The door behind her slammed a sudden crack that shot straight down my spine. Then I heard his voice. "So the Army didn't fix your attitude, huh?" Rick Fallon stepped into the doorway with a whiskey bottle dangling from 2 fingers. He looked at me like I was a problem he thought the world should have solved for him by now. His eyes were the same dull reddish color I remembered. His smirk was the same too. I stared back without moving. Training had changed the way my body reacted to fear. I no longer flinched outwardly, but a cold heaviness settled under my ribs. My mom whispered, "Go inside, honey," and guided me into the kitchen. She kept touching my arm like she was checking if I was real, or checking if I was safe. I could not tell which. Dinner was waiting on the table, but no one sat. The air felt thick with something sharp. Rick walked in without looking at either of us and dropped into his chair. He took a long drink and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "So, Specialist Marlowe," he said, mocking the rank, "you getting paid now? You think you are too good for this house." I kept my voice level. "It is just leave, Rick. I am here for a few days." He leaned forward. "You are here under my roof. That means you remember your place." My mom shot me a desperate look that meant do not react. Do not breathe wrong. Do not escalate. I lowered my eyes, and that was enough to set him off. He stood so fast the chair legs screeched against the floor. A bottle tipped. Glass hit the ground and shattered across the tiles. "Pick it up," he said. "Now." I moved slowly, trying to keep my breathing steady. My knees touched the floor as I reached for the pieces. A shard reflected the ceiling light. My fingers shook. I heard him step behind me. "You are slow," he muttered. The next second, his boot hit my face. A blunt burst of sound. A flash of white pain. My body dropped sideways onto the floor. My mom gasped, but she did not move. Tears brimmed in her eyes, but her feet stayed rooted to the tiles. Rick grabbed me by the hair and yanked me upward so fast my neck snapped back. "You think the Army makes you untouchable." I felt his breath hot and sour against my cheek. "You are nothing here." His fist hit the side of my head, then another. Each impact came faster than the breath I tried to drag in. Pain pulsed through my ribs as he slammed his knee into my side. I choked. My lungs refused to expand. My vision dipped like the lights were flickering inside my skull. "Stop!" "Rick," my mom whimpered. "Please, stop!" He shoved her away with one hand without taking his eyes off me. "No one will save you, not even your precious Army." My head hit the floor again. The room tilted. The ceiling drifted sideways. My heartbeat stuttered. A sharp buzzing filled my ears. I tried to inhale, but the air felt thick like it was caught in my throat. I tasted something metallic at the back of my tongue. My hands twitched against the tiles, trying to push myself up, but I could barely feel my fingers. My body felt heavy, like someone had pulled the bones out of me. Everything dimmed. My mom dropped to her knees beside me. Her hands hovered inches from my shoulder, but she did not touch me. Her voice cracked. "Tessa, please breathe." My chest spasmed. A bright edge of panic flared, then collapsed into blackness. My last thought was a whisper inside my head. "Someone, please." Then the world folded inward and disappeared. I used to think silence was normal. When you grow up inside a house where every sound can set off a storm, you learn to shrink your footsteps and control your breathing. I was 7 when my dad died in a factory accident, a conveyor malfunction that crushed him before anyone could reach the shutoff switch. I remember my mother crying for weeks, then stopping so suddenly it felt like someone had flipped a switch inside her. After that, she moved through the house like she was afraid of disturbing the air. She worked double shifts and came home exhausted, her shoulders always slumped forward as if she was carrying something no one could see. For a long time, it was just us. Some days she hugged me too tight, and other days she forgot to look at me at all, but she never raised her voice, never slammed a door, never told me anything was wrong. Silence was her shield, and it became mine too. When I was 13, she met Rick Fallon. I remember thinking he seemed friendly. He helped carry groceries to the house the first time he visited and joked about how little I weighed when he lifted me off the ground with one arm. My mom laughed harder than I had heard in years. She glowed around him. I wanted to believe he was good because she wanted him to be good. The first few months, he bought me small things: a notebook, a new pair of shoes. He said I was a bright kid and should take school seriously. But then the gifts stopped and the rules began. At first, they sounded like normal adult things. No shoes in the house, no leaving dishes in the sink, no slamming doors, no talking back. Then they started changing shape. No friends over ever. No phone after 8 unless it was homework related. No snack unless you asked his permission. No leaving your room unless the chores were done perfectly. He checked the corners when I vacuumed. He ran a finger along the banister to see if there was dust. If he found any, he sighed loudly and muttered about how kids these days did not respect the roof they lived under. Then he would call my mom and say she needed to handle me because I was slipping. My mom apologized to him every time. She apologized to me too, but her apologies were small and whispered in passing like she was afraid the words might leak out into the walls. Rick had a way of filling the entire house with his presence. I learned to recognize the sound of his truck pulling in the click of his belt buckle, the rhythm of his steps. If his footsteps were heavy, it meant he was irritated. If they were quiet, it meant he was thinking. Thinking was worse. Thinking meant he was looking for something to correct. He watched everything. How I sat, how I spoke, how long I took to respond. If I said too much, he accused me of being mouthy. If I said too little, he accused me of ignoring him. If I looked him in the eye for too long, he told me I was challenging him. If I looked away, he said I was weak. There was no safe direction. My mom changed too. She started moving like she had a string tied to her chest, pulling her back whenever she tried to speak. Her voice got softer, then almost vanished entirely. When they argued, she always folded within minutes, apologizing before he even raised a hand. She had been alone for so long after my dad died that when someone finally paid attention to her, she clung to it even when it hurt. I wanted to tell her he scared me, but every time I opened my mouth, she gave me that quick, panicked look that said, "Stop, please, not now." When I turned 14, my gym teacher pulled me aside after class. He said I had the potential to be an athlete if I wanted to be, and that I had the discipline most kids my age lacked. He asked if I had ever considered the military after high school. It was the first time an adult had looked at me with something like pride. I went home smiling for the first time in months and told my mom quietly while she was chopping carrots. She smiled a small, hesitant smile, but before she could say anything, Rick walked in. "What are you two whispering about?" My mom stiffened, then said nothing. I told him my teacher said I had potential. Rick stared at me for a moment, then laughed. He said people like me did not belong in the military because I did not know how to take orders. My chest tightened. Something in his eyes told me he was not joking. After that, he became suspicious of anyone who complimented me. If a neighbor said I was polite, he said they did not know the real me. If a teacher praised my work, he said they were lowering their standards. If my mom said she was proud of me, he told her she was making me arrogant. The house shrank around me year after year. The rules got stricter. The punishments blurred into a constant state of tension. I scrubbed floors until my knuckles cracked. I folded laundry until my fingers blistered. I learned to wash dishes so quietly that even water hitting steel barely made a sound. My friends started asking why I never came to birthday parties or football games. I lied. I said my mom needed me. I said I was busy. The truth was simpler. Rick did not like me having a life outside his control. One night when I was 16, I accidentally dropped a glass while unloading the dishwasher. It shattered near my foot. My breath caught. I froze in the middle of the tiles. Rick appeared instantly, as if he had been waiting for a mistake. He stepped so close I could feel the heat of his breath against my face. "Do you ever think before you act?" My mom stood behind him, pressing her fingers into her palms so hard her knuckles turned white. I wanted to cry, but I remembered her whisper earlier that year. "If you cry, you make it worse." So I swallowed every tear until it tasted like metal. Silence became the safest thing I had. By the time I was 17, fear was no longer sharp. It was familiar, predictable, a routine. Some kids grew up learning how to drive or how to prepare for college. I grew up learning how to make myself invisible. And for a long time, I thought that was what survival meant. I was 18, the first time I realized freedom was not an idea, but a place. And that place could only exist if I created it myself. Until then, I had lived inside Rick's rules, inside my mother's fear, inside a house where silence felt heavier than any slammed door. But senior year arrived, and with it came something I had not expected: a recruiter who looked me in the eye like I was a person with potential instead of a problem to be managed. He visited our high school on a Tuesday morning and spoke in the gym about opportunity discipline structure and a life where your effort meant something. I sat in the bleachers with my hands clasped tightly and listened to every word like it was oxygen. When he talked about the Army's promise to help you build yourself from the ground up, I felt something lift in my chest that I had not felt since I was a kid. I stayed after the presentation and asked questions quietly so no one could overhear. He told me the process, the paperwork, the requirements, the physical exam. Everything sounded terrifying and possible at the same time. I signed the preliminary paperwork in the hallway with my hands shaking. It felt like touching the edge of a new world. When I walked home that afternoon, the tension that usually clung to my steps felt lighter. But as soon as I opened the front door and saw Rick standing in the kitchen, I knew that feeling would not last long. He asked why I was late. I said I stayed after to talk to someone. His eyes narrowed. "Someone? About what?" I told him. His jaw tightened, and a small twitch appeared near the corner of his mouth. "The Army. Really?" He asked it like I had suggested something ridiculous and offensive. I nodded. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he walked out of the kitchen without another word. My mom watched silently from the stove, and her eyes filled with something like dread. That night, Rick searched my backpack while I was in the shower. I heard drawers open and papers rustle, but I stayed in the bathroom staring at my reflection in the fogged mirror because stepping out would make everything worse. When I returned to my room, the Army pamphlets were gone. The next day, the recruiter called and said he had not received the confirmation forms. I knew exactly why. I waited until Rick left for work, then tore apart the bedroom he and my mom shared until I found the papers shoved under a pile of old bills. My name was scratched with a pen as if someone had tried to sabotage the signature. That evening, he confronted me in the living room. "You are not joining the military," he said. "You are staying in this house until you learn respect." I felt something inside me crack open. Not fear, not anger. Something quieter and colder. The realization that if I did not leave, then I might never leave at all. I tried to explain that the recruiter said I qualified. Rick stepped closer. His voice dropped. I said no. The next morning, my mom woke me before sunrise and whispered for me to follow her quietly. She held my birth certificate in her hand, the one document I needed to finalize enlistment. Her fingers trembled. "Go before he wakes up," she said. Her voice broke. "And do not come back for anything." I stared at her. There were so many things I wanted to ask. Why she stayed, why she never fought for me, why it took this long for her to help. But the look in her eyes told me the answers would only hurt us both. I grabbed my backpack and moved quickly through the hallway, praying for the floorboards not to creak. I reached the front door and touched the handle, but before I could turn it, a loud crash erupted behind me. Rick had ripped open the bedroom door and came charging down the hall. "Where do you think you are going?" My mom stepped between us, but he pushed her aside so hard she hit the wall. I turned to face him fully for the first time in my life. I told him I was leaving. His face twisted. The veins in his neck bulged. He grabbed my duffel bag from the floor and threw it at me with so much force the strap slammed into my cheek and left a stinging mark. "You are nothing out there," he snarled. "You will come crawling back." I held his gaze even though every part of me wanted to retreat. "I will not come back." I said it quietly, but it felt like the strongest words I had ever spoken. Then I opened the door and ran. I did not look back at my mom. I did not look back at the house. I went straight to the recruiter's office, birth certificate in hand, and signed every document with a determination that felt carved from stone. When I boarded the bus weeks later for basic training, I stared out the window at the highway stretching wide and endless before me. I promised myself I would never return to that house. Never return to that fear. Never return to the girl who whispered instead of spoke. But promises made at 18 do not understand the way life circles back. I thought the Army would become my new home, my new beginning, and it did. But leave is mandatory and home address is required. When the day came months later and my sergeant handed me the approved leave form with my mother's address printed at the top, my stomach tightened. I realized that even freedom had strings attached, and mine led straight back to the place I swore I would never see again. When my leave dates were approved, I stared at the paper for a long time, hoping the address printed on it would magically change. It didn't. Fort Liberty had rules, and those rules did not bend for personal history. If a soldier listed a home address, that was where the leave form sent them, unless they filed legal documentation to change it. I hadn't done that. I wasn't ready then. So the address remained my mother's house in Rock Hill, South Carolina, and that meant I had to go back. My mom called the night before I left. Her voice shook the moment she said my name. She asked if I could come home. She said she missed me. She said she needed me. She never said Rick's name, but the silence that followed each sentence made his presence feel louder than the words themselves. I could hear something metallic in the background, maybe a bottle hitting the counter, and I felt the old tension rise inside my chest. I told myself I was stronger now. I told myself that training had taught me control. I told myself that Rick could not reach who I had become unless I let him. I promised I would keep my composure. I promised I would remember my rank. I promised I would not react. The bus ride from Fayetteville to Rock Hill was quiet. I sat near the window, my uniform warm from the sun, my thoughts heavier than my rucksack. Every bump in the road felt like it knocked loose a memory I wanted to forget. The smell of beer soaked into carpet, the sound of Rick's boots on the tile, the sharp way he said my name like it was an inconvenience. I kept reminding myself that I wasn't the same girl who left this place. I repeated it like a cadence until the words settled somewhere steady inside me. When the bus pulled into the small station near downtown Rock Hill, my stomach tightened. I stepped onto the pavement and adjusted my duffel strap. The air carried that thick summer humidity. My skin dampened instantly. My mom's car wasn't there. She had said she would come. For a moment, I wondered if Rick told her not to. I stood on the curb, watching the vehicles pass until I saw her running from across the parking lot. She must have parked far away. Her hair was messy like she had rushed. She hugged me so tightly that I felt her breath hitch against my collarbone. She kept whispering my name like she was afraid I would disappear again. But her eyes, they kept darting over my shoulder toward the direction of the house. I knew that look. Fear mixed with obligation and something like guilt. We drove in silence. She kept both hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, even though she usually drove with one hand. Her knuckles pressed white against the leather. I watched her shoulders rise and fall too quickly. When we reached the street, I felt the old heaviness return. The house looked exactly the same. The siding still needed painting. The shutters still leaned crooked. The porch light still flickered in that slow, inconsistent way that used to keep me awake. As soon as I stepped through the doorway, the smell hit me. Stale beer soaked into the walls. Old air trapped in corners. Humidity mixed with something sour. It was the smell of my childhood. It wrapped around me instantly like a hand gripping the back of my neck. I felt my training kick in automatically. Shoulders back, breathing controlled, eyes scanning, reaction measured. Do not escalate. Do not show fear. Do not show anger. My mom closed the door and whispered, "Welcome home," like she was apologizing. Then the living room door slammed open and Rick walked out. He didn't look at my mom. He looked at me the way he always did, like I had offended him simply by existing. He wore a sleeveless shirt, the kind stained with grease around the edges. His movements were slow and deliberate, like he wanted to make sure I saw every inch of territory he believed he owned. "Well, look at that!" The soldier returns. His voice dragged across the room like sandpaper. I kept my stance neutral. Not hostile. Not submissive. Just controlled. He stepped closer. I could smell the whiskey clinging to his breath. "Army teach you how to respect people yet?" I didn't answer. Anything I said would be bait. He smirked because silence irritated him. My mom tried to step between us subtly, but Rick lifted a hand and she froze. He walked around me in a slow circle, the way someone tests an electric fence to see if it will spark. "So you think you're tough now?" His voice lowered. "Think you're better than this house." I kept my eyes forward, breathing steady the way my drill sergeant had taught us on day 3 of basic. He hated that. He hated that my body no longer flinched. He hated that I didn't shrink anymore. He hated that the Army had given me muscles, discipline, and a spine that no longer bent the way it used to. My mom placed a shaking hand on my arm. "Tessa, honey, go unpack." I could hear the plea behind her words. Please not now. Please not in front of him. I wanted to protect her from whatever was simmering in him. But Rick wasn't done. He stepped in front of me, blocking my path. "I said something to you." I met his eyes just long enough to acknowledge him without challenging him. "Yes, sir." The words tasted bitter, but they slid out clean. He leaned back slightly as if surprised I answered. Then his expression twisted again. "You better remember you're not on base here. You follow my rules." My training spun through my head like a list. Maintain distance, de-escalate, keep posture calm. Avoid sudden movements. Do not return aggression. Everything in me pressed against the tension. I nodded once. Not agreement, not respect, just acknowledgement. But that single nod sent a pulse of heat through the room as if the air shifted in response. I walked to the hallway, slowly matching my pace to the steady rhythm of my breath. I felt his eyes burning into my back. The house felt smaller than my barracks room, smaller than the narrow aisles of the troop transport bus, smaller than any confined space I had ever trained in. I thought coming back for a few days would be manageable. Just a quick visit. Just enough time to reassure my mom I was alive and well. I told myself I could endure it. I told myself I was stronger than before. But standing in that house again, surrounded by the old smells and old shadows, I felt something sink in my stomach. I had returned, but the danger hadn't changed. And the tension that filled every inch of that house was already curling itself around me like it had been waiting. I should have known the shift in Rick's voice meant danger long before the first blow landed. It always started the same way, a drink too many. A sentence that sounded casual but carried an edge. A slow, simmering hostility that built like heat behind a closed door. That night, the temperature inside the house felt different the moment the sun went down. My mom moved around the kitchen with her shoulders tight, the way she did when she was trying to keep the peace before anything could ignite. Rick sat at the table with a half-empty bottle in front of him, tapping his fingers against the wood in that uneven rhythm that always meant something ugly was crawling closer. I stayed quiet. My training kept repeating in my head. Do not provoke. Keep posture neutral. Maintain control. It worked in barracks arguments and tense field moments. I hoped it would work here too. But Rick was not a soldier. He was a man looking for a target. When my mom asked if he wanted water, he muttered something under his breath. Then his eyes flicked toward me. "So the Army made you a big shot, huh?" He said it softly, but the air tightened around the words. I kept my voice steady. "No, sir." He leaned back in the chair and took another long drink. The bottle clinked against the table when he set it down. "You think you can walk around this house like you are better than us?" I did not move. I did not breathe wrong. He waited for a reaction, and when I did not give him one, something inside him clicked. He pushed his chair back abruptly, and it scraped across the floor. My mom froze at the sink. She turned slightly, her eyes wide with that familiar warning. "Please, Tessa, not now." I wished I could reassure her. I wished I could say I had control over what was about to happen. But the truth was, he had already decided. Rick stepped toward me. His movements were slow but heavy. Each footfall seemed to land in my bloodstream. He stopped inches from my face. His breath reeked of whiskey. "You walk around here all straight-backed like you think you are something special." The words slurred just slightly. I stayed calm. "Sir, I am only here for leave." His expression twisted. "Oh, leave. The military gives you a little time off and suddenly you think you can talk to me like an equal." My mom whispered his name. "Rick, please." He ignored her. He looked at me with a kind of fury that made the room feel smaller. "You think joining the army makes you tough. You think it makes you grown." He jabbed a finger at my chest. "Let me tell you something. You are nothing in this house." He shoved me backward, not hard enough to knock me down, hard enough to set the tone. I steadied myself automatically, too automatically. The reflex from training was a mistake. He saw it. His eyes narrowed. "Look at you," he hissed, "standing like you are ready for a fight. You think I will back down from you?" I shook my head, but he did not want the truth. He wanted justification. He wanted to release whatever was burning inside him. He stepped forward again, and this time his hand shot out and grabbed my shoulder. I tried to shift my weight the way we were taught in combatives to get out of the grip without escalating, but he noticed. His face contorted. "Oh, no. No army tricks in my house." Then everything happened fast. His fist struck the side of my head just above the temple. A blunt, heavy impact. Not the kind that knocks you out instantly. The kind that disrupts your vision, sending a flash of white across your eyes like a camera going off too close. I stumbled, my peripheral blurring at the edges. Before I found balance, his boot connected with my ribs. The pain shot across my side like a firework exploding inside the muscles. Not sharp, more like a crushing wave that stole my breath. Soft tissue trauma. My brain identified it automatically, the way training sometimes labels pain without permission. I tried to inhale, but the air stayed stuck high in my chest. He grabbed me by the arm and hauled me upright, then swung again. This time his knuckles hit lower near my jaw, and the shock jumped down my spine. My legs buckled, but he kept hold of my shirt, keeping me upright so he could hit me again. My mom pressed herself against the counter with her hands over her mouth. She did not scream. She did not move. Her fear held her in place as if the floor had turned to glue. Rick kept talking, but the words started to smear together. "You think you are tough now. You think wearing that uniform means something to me." Another blow. My vision wavered. I tried to stabilize, but he pushed me and I hit the floor. The tiles felt cold under my palms, but my skin could barely register temperature. I tasted something metallic at the back of my throat, the kind of taste that signaled the body was reaching its limit. I tried to roll to my side so I could breathe easier, but Rick stepped forward and kicked again, this time just below my sternum. The breath inside me collapsed. I gasped soundlessly. My lungs spasmed but barely pulled anything in. The edges of the room pulsed. Light, dark, light, dark. I could hear my heartbeat inside my ears louder than Rick's voice. My mom finally whispered a sound, a broken no that barely made it past her lips. Rick didn't stop. He crouched down close enough that his hand brushed my hair. His voice was low and thick. "You think the army will save you. They won't. No one will." My chest kept tightening. My body tried to drag in air but could not. The world dimmed. My fingers tingled, then numbed. My eyes drifted toward the kitchen window, and the bright square of evening light blurred into a smear. My mom dropped beside me and pressed a hand to my cheek. Her voice cracked. "Tessa, breathe. Please breathe." I tried. My lungs fluttered like they were trying to restart, but the darkness rushed in faster. The last thing I heard before everything went silent was my mom whispering frantically. "She just fainted, if anyone asks." She fainted from the heat. She fainted from the heat. The world folded in on itself like someone had flipped a switch and everything disappeared. When consciousness drifted back in, it didn't come all at once. It seeped in slowly the way cold air sneaks under a door. First, I felt the floor beneath me. Hard tile. Then the ache in my ribs pulsing in slow, heavy waves. then the heat blooming along my cheek where his fist had landed. My eyelids fluttered and the kitchen lights blurred overhead like I was looking through water. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. Then the smell hit me. Beer, sweat, something metallic. The house I grew up in. My mother's shaky breath reached my ears before her face came into focus. She knelt beside me, wiping something from my forehead with a damp cloth. Her hands trembled so much the cloth brushed across my skin unevenly. "Sweetheart, you fainted." Her voice cracked on the last word. "You fainted from the heat." I blinked slowly. My chest felt tight, every inhale shallow, like my lungs had forgotten how to expand. My ribs screamed when I tried to shift. Heat did not do this. I tried to speak, but my throat stung. She leaned closer. "Don't talk. Just breathe slow." Her eyes were glossy with fear, but not fear for me. Fear of him. I didn't see Rick at first. My vision skimmed the kitchen until I noticed his shadow leaning against the doorway. His arms crossed, his breathing steady, his presence heavy enough to warp the air. The moment I looked at him, his expression hardened. "If she talks, you both pay." His voice was low and quiet, the kind that cuts deeper because of how controlled it sounds. My mother flinched so visibly I felt the motion through the floor. Rick pushed himself off the doorframe and stepped into the kitchen. He didn't look at me. He looked at her. "Clean this up." He nodded toward the broken glass, still scattered near the table. "And make sure she doesn't bleed anywhere else." My mom swallowed hard and nodded. She nodded the way she always did, fast and apologetic, like she was trying to outrun the consequences. Rick left the room without another word. The silence he left behind felt thicker than before. My mom exhaled shakily, then pressed the cloth to my lip where a thin line of dried blood had formed. She kept whispering more to herself than to me. "It's okay. It's okay. It's okay." But her voice was breaking on every word. She helped me sit up slowly. The world tilted and steadied again. Pain radiated across my ribs so sharply my breath hitched. My mom cupped the back of my head gently and whispered sorry over and over. She picked up my torn shirt from the floor and folded it quickly, like folding it fast would erase the condition it was in. She hid it behind her back as if the fabric itself could betray us. When I tried to lift my arm, the pain shot through my side and I winced. She froze. "Tessa, please don't move." I shook my head weakly. "It's fine," I managed to whisper, even though it wasn't. Not even close. She helped me to my feet, but my knees buckled, and she caught me under the arm, her breath shaking with the effort. She led me slowly toward my old bedroom and sat me on the bed. My heartbeat thudded painfully inside my ears. Each inhale felt like sand scraping my ribs. She pulled out a clean shirt and helped me put it on because lifting my arms hurt too much. When she stepped back, her eyes filled again. She touched my cheek carefully. "Let me get you some ice." She was gone only a moment, but it felt longer. When she returned, she pressed a cold pack to my ribs with careful fingers. Her voice lowered to a whisper. "Tessa, you need to listen to me." Her eyes darted toward the hallway to make sure Rick wasn't standing there. "You cannot tell anyone what happened." My stomach tightened. I tried to speak, but she rushed ahead. "If the army finds out, they will take him away. They will arrest him. They will ruin everything." She said the words quickly, like she had rehearsed them before reaching the doorway. I stared at her confused. My ribs burned with every breath, and yet her fear wasn't for me. It was for him. My voice came out rough. "Mom, he hurt me." Her face crumpled. I know he did. But please, you do not understand what will happen." She grabbed my hands. I pulled in a breath and felt pain ripple through my chest. "Mom, they will help me. They will not ruin my life." She shook her head frantically. "They will take him away, and I cannot survive that." Her voice broke. I froze. The words slid into me colder than the ice pack on my ribs. She wasn't asking me to stay silent for my safety. She wasn't asking me to stay silent because she feared what he would do to me. She was asking me to stay silent because she feared losing him. He had become her anchor even if he was the one drowning her. She squeezed my hands tighter. "If anyone asks you fainted, the heat, the stress, something believable. Just, please, Tessa, don't say anything. For a long moment, I just sat there staring at her. My ribs ached, my head pounded, my vision kept blurring at the edges from the impact to my temple. But none of that hurt as sharply as realizing the truth sitting right in front of me. She chose him. She chose him knowing what he did. She chose him while I sat there barely able to breathe. Something inside my chest cracked open quietly, not loud like Rick's rage, silent like every moment of my childhood. My mom pressed the ice pack to my side again with trembling hands. Her eyes pleaded. "Promise me you won't tell the army. Promise me." I looked at her face, the fear etched into it so deeply it looked permanent. And in that moment, I felt myself break in a way no punch had ever managed. The ride back to Fort Liberty felt twice as long as the ride home. Every bump in the road sent a jolt of pain through my ribs, each vibration reminding me of the truth sitting just beneath my skin. I tried to breathe slowly the way the medics taught us during physical training to manage impact discomfort, but no amount of controlled breathing could stop the ache that spread down my side. I kept replaying my mother's voice, her terrified whisper, her shaking hands the way she chose him instead of me. The words followed me like shadows all the way back to base. By the time the bus rolled into Fayetteville, the July heat hit me full force. I stepped off my duffel heavier than I remembered, the strap pressing against a bruise on my shoulder that made me wince. The base gate looked the same as the day I left, but everything inside me felt changed. My breathing was shallow. My vision still flickered slightly whenever I turned my head too fast. I straightened my posture out of habit, but even that sent a ripple of pain through my side. I knew I didn't look right. I could feel it. The MPs at the gate noticed before I even made it through the checkpoint. One of them, a tall guy with sergeant stripes, narrowed his eyes the moment I handed him my ID. He scanned the card, then looked back at me, his gaze lingering on the bruising near my temple. "Specialist Marlowe, you good." His tone wasn't accusing. It was careful. The kind of careful trained into MPs who learn to read body language before words ever leave someone's mouth. I forced a nod. "Yes, Sergeant. Just a headache from the bus." He didn't buy it. I could tell by the way he hesitated before handing back my ID. His eyes shifted to the way I stood, the way my breathing caught every few seconds the faint discoloration peeking through the makeup I tried to dab on before leaving the house. He considered asking more, but I stepped back before he could. "I appreciate it, Sergeant." "I'm okay. Military culture teaches us to respect personal boundaries until safety becomes a concern, and from his point of view, I wasn't crossing that threshold. I wasn't bleeding. I wasn't stumbling. I wasn't reporting anything. So he let me through. But his eyes followed me until I passed out of sight. The walk to the barracks felt longer than usual. My duffel bumped against my hip, and every step sent a sharp reminder through my ribs. The sun pressed against the back of my neck. Sweat gathered along my collar and stung the cuts near my cheekbone. I kept telling myself, just make it inside. Just make it to your room. Just a few more steps. When I reached the barracks door, I had to stop for a moment. I leaned one hand against the wall and swallowed against the dizziness rising in my chest. A soldier walking past slowed down like he was about to ask something, but I straightened before he got close. I walked inside, trying to look normal. I failed. The second I stepped into the hallway, my battle buddy Serena saw me. She turned her head from her locker and froze. Her eyes widened. "Tessa, what happened to you?" Her voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp. I tried to wave her off. "I'm fine, just tired from travel." She stepped closer and the expression on her face changed from surprise to something deeper. She studied my posture, then the bruise along my jaw, then the way I held my ribcage unconsciously like I was trying to protect it. "This is not from a bus ride," she said quietly. "Who did this to you?" I shook my head and tried to walk past her. Nothing happened. "I'm just sore." But a wave of pain surged through my ribs and my knees faltered. Serena caught my arm. "That's it. You're going to medical." I pulled back weakly. "No, I'm fine." Her eyebrows lifted. "The hell you are? You can barely breathe." She slipped her arm under mine and supported my weight when I swayed again. I hated how helpless I felt leaning on her like that. A soldier is supposed to carry their own weight, not collapse under it. But my body made the decision for me. Every inhale stabbed, every step felt unstable. She escorted me down the hallway, ignoring my attempts to shrug her off. Other soldiers glanced up as we passed, some with concern, some with confusion, but no one stopped us. They could tell she had me. Once we reached the stairs and I winced, trying to step down the first one, her patience evaporated. "That's it," she muttered, and without waiting for permission, she guided me toward the elevator instead. The entire ride down, she kept glancing at me like she was waiting for me to break open the truth. I kept my lips pressed together, not because I wanted to protect Rick, not because I believed my mother anymore, but because saying it out loud would make it real. The doors opened and she walked me out into the bright heat again. The distance to Womack Army Medical Center felt like a mile, even though it was only a few minutes of walking. She slowed her pace to match mine, and every few seconds she tightened her grip around my arm when my breathing hitched. When the hospital came into view, I felt something in my chest twist, part fear, part relief. Medical meant questions. Questions meant truth. The truth meant everything I was trying to bury would surface whether I wanted it to or not. Serena pressed the button to open the automatic doors, and the cool air washed over us. A nurse looked up from the front desk and immediately noticed the bruising on my face and the way I was holding my ribs. She stood quickly. "What happened to you?" Serena answered before I could speak. "She just got back from leave. Something is wrong. Really wrong." The nurse motioned us forward. "Specialist, follow me." As I stepped deeper into the emergency wing, I felt the weight of the past few days pressing against my lungs. I could not hide this anymore, and I realized maybe I never should have tried. The fluorescent lights in Womack Army Medical Center always looked too bright, but that day, they felt blinding. The nurse led me through a short hallway and into an exam room where the air smelled faintly of antiseptic and cold metal. I eased myself onto the table, careful not to let my ribs brush against the edge. Even the slight pressure of sitting upright made my breath catch. Serena stood near the door with her arms crossed, watching me with an expression that mixed worry with something sharper. She wasn't going to leave until someone in authority took over. A few minutes later, the door opened and a woman in uniform stepped in. Her rank caught my eye, first an oak leaf on her chest. A major. Major Elena Ruiz. She walked with a calm confidence that filled the entire room. Her presence was steady in the way only seasoned Army medical officers could manage. She glanced at the chart the nurse handed her, then at me. "Specialist Marlowe, I presume?" "Yes, ma'am." My voice cracked slightly. Her eyes moved over me quickly, assessing. She didn't show alarm. She didn't gasp. She didn't react the way civilians often did when they saw injury. She simply observed as if each detail was another piece of a puzzle she was already fitting together in her mind. "Tell me what happened." Her tone wasn't harsh. It was clinical, controlled. It made lying feel pointless and telling the truth feel impossible. I swallowed. "I fell. At home." Major Ruiz raised an eyebrow. "You fell?" "Yes, ma'am." She didn't write anything down. Instead, she stepped closer and gently pushed my hair back from my temple. Her fingertips brushed the bruise forming along the side of my face. I winced. She nodded slightly as if confirming something. Then she looked at my wrist. I hadn't realized there were marks there until she touched the skin lightly. They were faint red streaks forming the shape of fingers. Her voice stayed even. "Did you fall on someone's hand?" I looked down. "No, ma'am. That wouldn't make sense." She placed two gloved fingers on the edge of my rib cage. The pain shot through me so quickly I sucked in a sharp breath. She didn't push harder. She didn't need to. She stepped back and exhaled slowly through her nose. "Specialist, I'm going to be direct with you. These injuries are not consistent with a fall." My throat tightened. She pointed gently to the bruise on my temple. "This is from a strike. Horizontal force. Not vertical. Not from losing balance." She gestured toward my ribs. "The trauma pattern here is soft tissue compression. A fall doesn't usually create this level of displacement without visible abrasions. This was a foot or a knee. Someone stepped or kicked." My chest tightened, my hands shook in my lap. She lowered her voice, but not her authority. You have grab marks on your wrist. You have bruising on both sides of your upper arm. Your breathing is shallow not from exertion, but from guarding pain. This is not a single impact. This is repeated force. Something inside me cracked open and the words came out too quickly. It was an accident. She tilted her head slightly. The movement was small but carried weight. Specialist Marlowe. I have been doing this for 18 years. There are things that can be mistaken for accidents, and then there are things that cannot. This is the second category. My eyes burned. The room felt too small for my breathing. She continued calmly. Under Department of Defense Instruction 6400.06, I am required to notify the Family Advocacy Program when there is evidence of potential domestic abuse involving a service member or their dependent. Required. That word made my stomach drop. She wasn't giving me an option. She wasn't making a suggestion. This was the process, and the process had already begun whether I liked it or not. My voice trembled. Ma'am, please. It wasn't what it looks like. She crossed her arms gently, not confrontationally, but firmly. Your injuries tell a different story. That sentence hung in the air like a verdict. Serena glanced at me, her jaw tight. She hadn't said a word since the exam began, but her eyes told me she had suspected from the moment she saw me walk through the barracks door. Major Ruiz sat on the stool across from me. Her tone softened but did not lose its precision. Specialist, I know what fear looks like. And shame. And loyalty to people who do not deserve it. I've seen it more times than I can count. But what happened to you is not something you can hide. Even if you wanted to, I cannot allow it. I shook my head. My ribs screamed with each movement. My mom, her voice echoed in my mind. Please don't tell the Army. They'll take him away. I felt something twist inside my chest. A mixture of guilt and loyalty and anger and confusion. My voice cracked again. Ma'am, it was just heat. Stress. I fainted. She didn't react. She simply opened a drawer and pulled out a small recording device that she set on the counter. Specialist, I'm asking you one more time because it matters for your medical documentation. Did someone do this to you? I stared at my hands. My fingers trembled against the fabric of my uniform. My heart pounded so loudly it felt like the sound filled the entire room. I wanted to tell the truth. I wanted to tell every detail, but guilt clawed at my throat. If I said it out loud, then everything my mother feared would come true. Her life would unravel, her world would collapse, and she had begged me. She had looked at me with eyes full of desperation and said, please. So I swallowed hard. No, ma'am. I told you. It was an accident. Major Ruiz didn't argue. She didn't press again. She simply stood and walked to the computer in the corner. As she typed, she said calmly, whether you choose to disclose today or tomorrow or next month, the injuries still meet reporting criteria, so the referral will be made. I felt the floor tilt under me. She continued, a representative from the Family Advocacy Program will reach out. You'll likely also be contacted by CID depending on what they determine. I felt my breath quicken. CID, Criminal Investigation Division. The words made my ribs ache harder. She turned back to me. Specialist, listen to me carefully. You are not in trouble. You did not do anything wrong. You are not weak. You are not failing. Something was done to you, and it is my duty to protect you even if you are not ready to protect yourself yet. My eyes blurred. I had held everything in for so long that hearing someone speak to me like that felt unreal. Serena finally moved. She stepped closer and rested a hand on my shoulder, gentle but steady. We've got you, she whispered. You're not alone. My throat closed. I tried to inhale, but the sound came out shaky. Major Ruiz handed me a small cup of water. Hydrate. Breathe slow. The nurse is going to get imaging and labs. After that, we'll move forward. Move forward. The phrase echoed in my mind. Forward meant investigation. Investigation meant truth. Truth meant consequences. And consequences meant everything I left behind in Rock Hill was about to surface no matter how hard my mother tried to bury it. I lowered my head as the weight of it settled over me. The Army had stepped in, and there was no turning back. The Army does not wait for permission to protect its own. By the time the nurse finished taking my vitals and the radiology tech wheeled me toward imaging, the process had already started. I did not know it then, but the moment Major Ruiz entered the initial notes into the system, an automatic flag triggered. The Family Advocacy Program received a digital alert. A case file with my name on it opened even before I returned to the exam room. When I came back from X-rays, a woman in civilian clothing but with a DoD badge clipped to her belt stood inside the doorway talking quietly with Serena. She turned toward me when I entered and introduced herself as Ms. Hayes from FAP. Her voice was soft, but her presence carried the same weight I had seen in senior NCOs. She wasn't someone you lied to easily. Specialist Marlowe. I'm here to make sure you're safe and to gather information. She gestured to the chair beside the table. Do you feel comfortable speaking for a few minutes? Comfortable wasn't the right word. Nothing in me felt steady enough to be called that, but refusing would raise more questions, so I nodded. She sat and opened a small folder. The first page was blank except for my name typed at the top. She began simply. Can you tell me in your own words what happened during your leave? My pulse thudded inside my bruised ribs. I kept my eyes on the floor. I told her the same story I told Major Ruiz. I fainted. Heat. Stress. I tripped, but as soon as the words left my mouth, I could feel them collapsing under their own weight. Ms. Hayes kept watching me not with suspicion, but with a calm patience that made the truth harder to bury. She was trained to notice inconsistencies in tone, posture, eye movement. She asked follow-up questions, each one precise but not aggressive. Did you hit your head when you fell? Did you lose consciousness? Were you alone? Were there witnesses? Was there anything you're worried might be misinterpreted? Each question tightened the walls around the lie I was trying to maintain. When I hesitated, she tilted her head slightly. Specialist, if someone harmed you, it is not your fault. You will not face consequences for reporting it. My throat tightened. She waited. Not rushing, not judging, just waiting for my truth. I stuck to the script. No one hurt me. It was an accident. Her shoulders rose with a slow breath. Then she said something that felt like a quiet warning. FAP will continue to review your case even if you decline to disclose today. We take patterns as seriously as statements. Before I could ask what that meant, someone knocked on the door. A man in ACUs stepped in. His name tape read, Willis. The red CID badge clipped near his pocket made my stomach drop. Criminal Investigation Division. Agents who handled everything from fraud to violent offenses involving service members. If they were here already, it meant the system had moved faster than I imagined. Agent Willis nodded to Ms. Hayes, then looked at me. Specialist Marlowe. We need to ask you a few questions to verify the circumstances of your injuries. His tone was firm, but not harsh, the kind of steady voice used to prevent panic rather than evoke it. I felt Serena shift beside me. She wasn't allowed to stay for an official CID interview, and she knew it. She squeezed my shoulder lightly and slipped out. Willis sat in the chair Ms. Hayes had used and opened a tablet. I watched the screen reflect the harsh exam room lights. Before we begin, I want you to understand something he said. You are not under investigation. Your leave documentation and medical report triggered a mandatory review. We simply need clarity. That should have made me feel better. It didn't. He started with straightforward questions. When did you leave Fort Liberty? What bus route did you take? What time did you arrive in Rock Hill? Who picked you up? Then the questions shifted. When you reached your home address, were you injured? I said no. When did you first notice pain or bruising? I hesitated. He glanced at the screen. The pause was a data point to him. Did you have any accidents inside the home? Did you fall? Did anyone witness this fall? I felt the room shrinking. I kept giving answers that hovered between truth and fiction. Half-formed explanations, vague descriptions. Nothing with detail, nothing with weight. He nodded slowly after each response as if recording how the truth bent rather than broke. Then he changed the angle entirely. Specialist, your injuries were documented by Major Ruiz. They are not consistent with a simple fall. The words struck harder because he wasn't judging. He was stating a fact. I shook my head. It was an accident, I swear. He watched me quietly. Ms. Hayes was still in the room, standing near the counter with her hands folded. Her silence felt intentional, like she was letting the CID protocol run its course while observing my reactions. After a long moment, Willis changed tactics again. We reviewed footage from the Rock Hill bus station. You were walking with your duffel on your left shoulder. He paused. No limp, no signs of discomfort, no visible bruising. My pulse jumped. Of course they checked. It was the Army. They checked everything. He continued. According to your leave schedule, you arrived home approximately 20 minutes after that footage. Then he pulled something up on his tablet, a still image. The street outside my house, a timestamp. A neighbor's outdoor camera had caught me approaching the door. My face wasn't clear, but it showed my posture. Upright, steady. Not the posture of someone who had already suffered the injuries I had now. We also spoke briefly with a neighbor who was home during the evening. She reported hearing raised voices. Then she paused, said she heard what she believed was screaming. My breath caught. Heat rose behind my eyes. My mother's voice echoed again. If anyone asks you fainted. The heat, stress, something believable. I closed my eyes. My ribs ached with the movement. I wanted to disappear into the exam table. Willis waited another moment, then said softly, Specialist, if someone harmed you, the Army will not allow it to continue. But we need the truth. Silence filled the room. Heavy, dense. Each second stretched out until I felt like the air itself was pressing against my skin. Ms. Hayes finally stepped forward. She crouched slightly so she could look directly into my eyes. Specialist, the people who hurt you rely on silence. They rely on your fear. They rely on you protecting them. You do not have to do that here. My vision blurred. I pressed a hand lightly to my ribs and felt the pain throb under my fingertips. I tried to inhale and my breath shook. I wanted to break open. I wanted to spill everything. Instead, I whispered the same fragile lie. No one hurt me. It was just an accident. The room went still, not disappointed, not surprised, just still. Agent Willis closed the tablet. Very well. We will continue gathering documentation. FAP will remain assigned to your case. If anything changes, you may contact us at any time. They both stood. My head felt light. My body felt hollow. As they left the room, I felt the strange sensation of the ground shifting beneath me. The truth I tried so desperately to bury was already unearthing itself piece by piece. No matter what I said, the Army had begun to stitch together the real story. And once that process started, there was no stopping it. The investigation had begun. And the truth was coming whether I spoke it or not. The first call came at 5:14 a.m., long before the sun rose over Fort Liberty. I was half asleep in the barracks, my ribs aching from the previous day's examinations when my phone buzzed violently against the metal nightstand. I reached for it, squinting at the screen. Rick Fallon. My stomach dropped so hard it felt like gravity shifted. I should have let it ring. I should have turned the phone off. But fear works strangely. Sometimes it pulls you toward the very thing you want to run from. I answered. His voice came through in a hoarse growl. You think the Army will save you? The words slithered through the speaker and into the room like smoke, thick and poisonous. I didn't answer. My breath caught in my throat the way it had when his boot struck my ribs. He inhaled sharply, the sound like someone dragging air through clenched teeth. You're not safe just because you're hiding behind those uniforms, he said. They can't protect you. No one can. He hung up. I stared at the phone long after the call ended. My hands shook slightly. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to breathe slowly the way the medics taught us after impact injuries. I tried to convince myself it was over, that he had said what he needed to say. But 15 minutes later, my phone buzzed again, and again, and again. By the fourth call, I stopped answering. By the eighth call, the vibration felt louder than my heartbeat. By the 11th call, Serena burst into my room still half asleep and grabbed the phone from my nightstand. Tessa, what is going on? I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. She looked at the screen. Her eyebrows shot up. Is that him? She didn't need my answer. My entire body gave it away. She swore under her breath, snatched my phone, and marched down the hall to get our platoon sergeant. I stayed sitting on the edge of the bed, elbows on my knees, staring at the door. I felt like a child again, small, cornered, guilt and fear twisting in my ribs more painfully than any bruise. 10 minutes later, 2 CID agents walked into the room. One of them I recognized Agent Willis, calm and sharp-eyed, the man who had interviewed me the day before. He carried a small recording device clipped to his pocket. "Specialist Marlowe," he said, closing the door behind him. "We need your phone." My mouth went dry. "Why?" Agent Willis didn't flinch. "Because the calls started at 0514. That means he's escalating, and that makes them evidence." Serena placed the phone in his hand before I could respond. The device beeped softly as he began the extraction process. Every voicemail, every missed call, every timestamp, every word. The Army leaves nothing undocumented, especially when a soldier might be in danger. He glanced at me once. "Did you answer any of these?" I nodded stiffly. His jaw tightened, but not in anger. In understanding. "You're not in trouble. We just need clarity." He pressed a button and Rick's voice filled the room, tinny through the device, but unmistakable. "You think the Army will save you. You think you can run from this. You think you're safe. You're not safe." I flinched hearing it again. Serena crossed her arms, furious. Agent Willis paused the playback and made a note. "These are threat specialists. Whether you believe them or not, they meet the criteria for an escalated DV risk assessment." My chest tightened. I could hear my mother's voice from that night echoing in my head. "Please don't tell the Army. They'll take him away." I looked down at my shaking hands. The CID agent's voice gentled slightly. "We've already contacted local authorities. They're speaking with your mother now." My heart stuttered. My mother. I pictured her standing in the kitchen, wringing her hands, pleading with me not to ruin everything. And now she was alone in a room with officers asking about screaming and bruises and why her daughter couldn't breathe properly. Agent Willis seemed to sense the collapse happening inside me. He sat on the opposite bunk. "Specialist, I need you to hear something. When an abuser realizes the victim is slipping out of control, this is exactly what they do. They lash out, they panic, they try to reassert dominance." His voice softened. "And they try to manipulate the people around them. Often the ones who love them." My throat tightened. My mother didn't love him because he treated her well. She loved him because she didn't believe anything else existed for her. That was a different kind of bruise, one you couldn't see on skin. A knock sounded at the door. A second agent stepped in holding a tablet. "Sir, we just received confirmation. Mother is cooperating, but—" The agent hesitated. "She's terrified." My stomach twisted. What happened? He lowered his voice. She tried to lie. Twice. But when they pressed for details, she broke down crying. She's not naming him directly, but she is contradicting her earlier statements, which means she's cracking. The words hit me like a cold wave. Cracking. Breaking. The unraveling had begun. I covered my face with both hands and forced myself to breathe through the pain swelling in my ribs. Serena sat beside me, grounding me with a hand on my back. Agent Willis stood. His voice remained steady. "Specialist Marlowe, we are not here to destroy your family, but we cannot ignore evidence when a soldier is being threatened." The next part, he said carefully. "And based on his behavior this morning, we believe there is a risk of escalation." The word risk sent another pulse of fear through me. Agent Willis continued. "We'll need a full timeline from you. Everything you remember. Every detail from the moment you arrived in Rock Hill to the moment you returned." I nodded even though my chest tightened. He left briefly to take a call. When he returned, his expression had changed harder, more focused. "We have another voicemail. It came in while we were talking." He pressed play. Rick's voice came through louder this time, frantic and angry. "You think you can do this to me. You think you can turn them against me. You think they'll take your side. You're mine. You hear me? Mine." I shivered. Serena swore. The room fell silent. Agent Willis clicked off the device. "That is no longer denial or intimidation. That is possessive language. and it's exactly the kind of phrasing we see in cases right before a violent escalation. I felt the world tilt slightly. I pressed my fingertips to my temples. My ribs ached with every inhale. My mother's voice kept echoing in my skull. "Don't tell the army. They'll take him away." The truth sank in like a weight. They weren't taking him away. He was pulling himself down. The more he panicked, the more he exposed himself. And the army wasn't just listening. They were building a case, brick by brick, timestamp by timestamp, tear by tear. My life had split cleanly in two before the truth and after the truth. And there was no going back. I didn't know the briefing was about me until it was too late to walk out. At first, it looked like any other mandatory unit training rows of metal chairs lined up in the company classroom projector, humming against the wall, soldiers shuffling in half awake with energy drinks and notebooks. Domestic violence awareness briefing, the slide said, routine, required annually, nothing unusual. But the moment I saw Major Elena Ruiz standing near the front, hands clasped behind her back, my stomach tightened. She didn't normally attend unit briefings. She was medical. The fact that she was here at all meant something had shifted. I sat near the middle, trying to keep my breathing steady through the throbbing in my ribs. Serena sat beside me, silent and tense. The company commander called us to attention, then at ease, and introduced the briefing. Educational purposes, prevention, recognition, resources. It all sounded standard until he said, "We will be reviewing an anonymized case involving a soldier from this installation." My heartbeat stumbled. Heat crawled up my neck. Anonymous. I prayed it was someone else. Anyone else. But deep down, I knew it was never going to be someone else. Major Ruiz stepped forward. Her calm presence filled the room the way it had in the exam area. She spoke with the same steady voice she had used with me. "Today's case is being shared with permission, and all identifying details have been removed." She wasn't lying. She had asked for my permission. I hadn't given it. But under Army policy, the IFAP could still present cases if anonymized for training and safety purposes. She hadn't betrayed me. The system was simply doing what it always did, shining a light on what someone tried to hide. She clicked to the next slide. The air shifted instantly. A medical diagram appeared showing soft tissue trauma to the rib cage, bruising, impact angles, notes from the radiology report. I felt the blood drain from my face. Serena whispered my name, barely audible. Tessa. But the room around us grew quiet. Too quiet. Soldiers who were half asleep seconds earlier now leaned forward with focused eyes. Some tilted their heads. Some frowned. Soft murmurs rippled through the back row. Major Ruiz continued. This soldier returned from leave showing signs of acute trauma, including bruising to the temple, compression injuries to the ribs, and evidence of force consistent with repeated strikes. My heart hammered so loudly I couldn't hear the rest of her words. More slides. Photos of injury patterns, not my face, not my torso, but outlines. Diagrams. Enough detail that anyone who had seen me walking around the barracks the last 2 days could connect the dots. Someone behind me whispered, Is that her?" Another soldier hissed, "Dude, look at the jaw bruising, that's the same pattern." The murmurs grew thicker, recognition spreading like a wave across the room. I sank lower into my seat, wishing I could disappear into the floor. Then Major Ruiz clicked the next slide and the room went dead silent. A waveform appeared on the screen. An audio file. I froze. No, 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 no. She pressed play. Rick's voice filled the classroom speakers, low and venomous. "You think the army will save you?" The sound punched the air out of my lungs. A few soldiers' heads snapped in my direction. Serena immediately reached for my hand under the table. My fingers were ice cold. The voicemail continued. "You're not safe. You hear me? You're mine!" Gasps scattered across the room. Someone whispered, "What the hell?" Another said, "That's a threat. That's a felony-level threat." My eyes blurred instantly. I blinked hard, trying to hold everything together, but the swell of shame and relief mixed so violently inside me that I couldn't tell where one feeling ended and the other began. Then came the second voicemail. You think you can turn them against me. You think they'll take your side. The voice trembled with anger, frantic and possessive, the exact tone that had haunted every corner of my childhood. That's DV escalation, someone whispered. That's classic coercive control. Another soldier muttered, I'll break his face. I couldn't breathe. My ribs tightened painfully. Grief surged up like it had been waiting my entire life for this crack in the dam. Tears blurred my vision until the projector light fractured across my eyes. I clenched my jaw, tried to hold it in, tried to be a soldier, tried to be tough, but I wasn't tough enough to stop this. The first tear fell silently, then another. Then they came faster. Serena shifted closer, shielding me with her shoulder, whispering, Hey, breathe. I'm right here. Just breathe. I couldn't. Not at first. Not with the entire unit silently watching the truth I had tried to suffocate for years now displayed in crisp audio clarity. This wasn't just humiliation. This was exposure. Complete. Absolute. The slide faded. The lights brightened. The room stayed silent. No one moved. No one coughed. No one even adjusted in their seat. They just watched me slowly, quietly falling apart. Major Ruiz didn't call attention to me. She didn't look at me with pity. She simply said, This soldier survived. This soldier came back to us. And this soldier is not alone. Something inside my chest cracked so sharply I felt it physically. Not pain like Rick caused. Something different. Something releasing. My breath hitched, then steadied. My tears kept falling, but I wasn't collapsing. I realized I wasn't being exposed to be humiliated. I was being exposed to be freed. Serena squeezed my hand tighter. My platoon sergeant stood from the side of the room, his jaw clenched in controlled fury, eyes on me with something that looked painfully close to respect. A specialist behind me muttered, I swear to God if that man ever comes near her again. A ripple of fierce protectiveness moved through the room like a silent oath, and in that moment, surrounded, seen, stripped bare, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Safety. Not because Rick was gone, not because the pain had faded, but because I finally understood I wasn't fighting alone anymore. And that realization hit harder than any blow I had ever taken. It was the moment I broke. But it was also the moment I began to heal. The morning after the briefing, I woke up before sunrise, staring at the ceiling in the barracks while the building hummed faintly around me. Everything felt too quiet, too still, almost like the silence after a storm where you're not sure whether it's truly over or just gathering again somewhere out of sight. My body still ached in familiar waves, but the pain wasn't the part keeping me awake. It was the weight of being seen, completely, unavoidably. For the first time in my life, someone had stepped between me and the darkness instead of pretending it didn't exist. The army didn't rescue me. They didn't swoop in like a movie, but they noticed, they cared, they acted, and that was enough to make the world tilt in ways I wasn't prepared for. By 0700, I was sitting across from a behavioral health counselor in a small room with soft lighting and a bowl of peppermints on the table like an attempt to make trauma taste sweeter. Her name was Dr. Sloan. Civilian. Calm voice. Warm eyes. Her first question wasn't about Rick. It wasn't even about the bruises. How are you breathing? I blinked at her. Breathing? She nodded slowly. When everything inside you is shaken, your body will tell the truth before your mouth does. So let's start with breathing. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so I did neither. I sat there in my uniform, stiff and upright, trying to force my lungs into something that resembled normal. They didn't quite cooperate. My breath trembled halfway out. She noticed. She didn't press. That's fine, she murmured. Your body isn't wrong. It learned to survive by tightening. It can learn safety, too. It just takes time. Counseling wasn't optional. Command made sure of that. But as the session went on, optional didn't matter anymore. I found myself talking not everything, not even half, but pieces. Small ones. Edges of memories. Words that felt like glass in my throat. And she didn't flinch. Not once. When I paused, she didn't fill the silence with pity. She gave me space. She held it for me. She told me I wasn't broken. She said my reactions made sense for someone who had lived in danger long enough to call it home. When the session ended, she handed me a card with appointment times already written in. "You won't lose your place here," she said. "Not in this office, not in this process." Outside, the air felt sharper, cleaner, like breathing was just a little less of a battle. By afternoon, I reported to my platoon sergeant. He looked at me for a long moment, long enough that I wondered if he expected me to apologize for being a problem for disrupting schedules for bringing personal chaos onto Army time. But he only said, "We're taking you off high-intensity duties for now. You focus on healing. That's an order." I swallowed tightly. "Yes, Sergeant." He studied my face again. "And just so you know, nobody here thinks you're weak." I didn't have an answer for that, not one that made sense. So I nodded, barely, then walked out before my throat closed. For the next few days, everyone treated me differently, but not in the way I feared. They weren't tiptoeing around me or avoiding eye contact. It was the opposite. Soldiers who barely knew my name suddenly paused in hallways to ask if I needed anything. The specialist from Alpha Company handed me a protein bar without saying a word. Another soldier adjusted her pace during a ruck march so I wouldn't fall behind while my ribs healed. It wasn't charity. It wasn't pity. It was solidarity. A word I didn't know how to hold. Serena stuck to me like gravity. She walked with me to appointments, ate chow with me even when she didn't want to. She became the quiet anchor I didn't know I needed. One night, sitting outside the barracks with her legs stretched out on the concrete, she said softly, "You know you didn't deserve any of it." My throat tightened instantly. "I know what people say," she continued. "Some soldiers come from hard-hitting homes and think it makes them strong. But what happened to you wasn't strength training. It was cruelty, and you didn't deserve to carry it alone." I stared at the parking lot lights blinking hard. I thought I whispered. I thought if I stayed quiet long enough, maybe he'd stop. "Quiet only protects monsters," she said, "not the people they hurt." Something inside me shivered at that truth. Over the next week, medical cleared me for light duty only. No PT tests, no weighted drills. My ribs needed time. My head did too. Every time I walked past a mirror, I half expected to see the ghost version of myself, the one Rick spent years shaping, the one who apologized for breathing too loudly. But instead, I saw something new. The swelling faded. The bruises turned yellow. My posture straightened a little more each morning. My eyes lost the fog of someone bracing for a blow. It felt foreign. Wrong. Like wearing someone else's skin. But the longer I stayed on base, the more the world around me began to overwrite the world inside me. Soldiers called my name in the D-Facey line. People waved at me from the track. Even the MPs at the gate nodded respectfully. They didn't look at me like broken glass. They looked at me like a soldier. Like someone worth protecting, worth believing, worth keeping alive. One evening, sharpening my boots for inspection, I realized something that hit deeper than any bruise Rick ever left. The Army didn't save me. They simply showed me that I deserved saving. That was the difference. And it was everything. It was the crack in the wall, the shift in my breathing, the start of a life where I wasn't only surviving, but learning how to exist without fear gripping the base of my spine. I wasn't fixed. I wasn't healed. But I was no longer alone in the dark. And for the first time since I was 13 years old, I looked at the future and didn't see a locked door. I saw a path, a real one that led forward instead of back, one that led toward something like freedom, and I wasn't afraid to follow it anymore. I was sitting in the day room folding my PT shirts when my phone buzzed with a Fayette County number I didn't recognize. I hesitated before answering, half expecting another voicemail from Rick, somehow slipping through whatever blocks CID had placed. Instead, I heard a man clear his throat. "Specialist Marlowe. This is Deputy Collins with the York County Sheriff's Office." My hands froze mid-fold. For a second, the room tilted. "We're currently at your mother's residence conducting follow-up on an active investigation," he said. "I'm calling to confirm some information and notify you of developments." Developments. The word tasted cold, heavy, final. My voice barely worked. "Is my mother okay?" There was a pause long enough for my pulse to spike. "She's physically fine," he said, "but she's extremely distressed." I closed my eyes, exhaling a shaky breath. Serena, sitting across from me polishing her boots, lifted her head, instantly alert. The deputy continued. "When we arrived, Mr. Fallon refused entry and attempted to deny our warrant. He became verbally aggressive. Your mother contradicted herself several times. She initially claimed you had tripped and then said you ran into a cabinet, then said she didn't see anything at all." My stomach knotted. I could see it in my mind, the kitchen I grew up in, the sagging floral curtains, the corner where my mother always stood wringing her hands, eyes downcast. Because her statements were inconsistent, the deputy said we informed her she could be investigated for obstruction. I sat up straight. "She's not. She didn't. My mom didn't mean to interfere. She's just scared," he finished gently. "We know." Which is why, after speaking privately with her, she chose to cooperate. The word cooperate landed with a weight I didn't expect. She provided details about past incidents, he added. "Not everything, but enough." My chest tightened with something sharp and painful, not exactly relief, not exactly grief, something in between. "Mr. Fallon was taken into custody for questioning," he said. "Given the evidence from CID, the voicemails, and your medical reports, he's being held pending charges." I swallowed hard. "Thank you," I whispered. He lowered his voice. "I'm sorry. You're going through this. Your mother asked us not to call you, but legally, we had to inform you." Something inside me cracked slightly hearing that. She asked them not to call me. Not because she wanted to protect me, because she wanted to protect him. When the call ended, I stared at my phone like it was something radioactive. Serena didn't speak. She simply slid her chair closer, letting the silence hold what I couldn't. An hour later, my phone rang again. This time, I knew before I even looked. "Mom." The screen flashed her name in bright white letters that stabbed my eyes. I answered slowly. "Mom." All I heard at first was breathing, shaky, wet, panicked. Then her voice, small and jagged. "You ruined everything." The words sliced through my chest so deeply I doubled over slightly. "Mom, they took him," she sobbed. "They took your stepfather away in handcuffs. The neighbors saw. Everyone saw. Do you know what you've done?" My mouth opened, but no sound came out. My ribs burned. My vision swam. She wasn't asking if I was okay. She wasn't asking if I was in pain or safe. She wasn't even angry because she loved him. She was angry because losing him meant losing the shield that had kept her life predictable, even if that life was built on fear and silence. "You told them she choked. You talked to those army people. You let them dig into our home." "Mom." "I didn't tell them anything specific," I whispered. "They saw the injuries. They heard the recordings. You could have stopped it," she cried. "You could have stayed quiet. You always stayed quiet." Serena, hearing the tremor in my voice, moved to sit beside me. I pressed a hand to my ribs, trying to breathe without wincing. "Mom," I said softly. "He hurt me." She inhaled sharply, like the truth scorched her lungs. "You provoked him." The moment she said it, something deep inside me, the last little thread tying me to the version of myself that obeyed, that submitted, that kept peace at all costs, snapped cleanly. I sat up straighter. My hands stopped shaking. My tears dried instantly. "I didn't provoke him," I said quietly, but with a steadiness that surprised even me. "He lost control, and you helped him hide it." Silence, a long one. Then a soft whimper. "I didn't have a choice," she whispered. He gets angry. You know how he gets. If I said anything, if I tried, so you let him hurt me," I finished, "and you chose him. Every time." She sucked in a breath like I'd slapped her, but it was the truth she had been running from for years. "I can't do this," she whispered. "I can't lose him. I can't do this alone." For a moment, I almost broke. Because beneath all her denial, all her excuses, all her misplaced loyalty, she wasn't the villain of my story. She was a victim who stayed a victim so long she didn't remember how to be anything else. But that didn't make her betrayal hurt any less. Mom, I said softly, I can't carry this for you anymore. She inhaled sharply, then the line went dead. She hung up. I lowered the phone slowly. Serena exhaled a long breath. That sounded rough. I nodded, unable to speak. She paused. But, Tessa, you didn't ruin anything. He did, and she's just scared because the truth finally came out. I rested my head back against the wall. For the first time, I realized how heavy it had always been, being my mother's emotional shield, her protector, her excuse for staying. Now, she'd lost that excuse and she blamed me for it. This wasn't the first betrayal. That had happened years ago when she let him take control of our home. But this was the second. The moment she chose her own fear over my safety. The moment she said the words I had spent my whole childhood dreading. You ruined everything. I didn't cry. Not this time. Something inside me had already reached a deeper stage of grief, one where tears stopped being the language of pain and became the language of release. I wasn't losing a mother. I was letting go of a ghost. And even though it hurt more sharply than I expected, the wound felt clean, honest, necessary. I didn't know what came next for her, but I knew for the first time in my life what came next for me. Freedom. I thought the investigation would calm down after Rick was taken into custody, but the truth is, things only got heavier. The Army and the civilian justice system moved in tandem like two massive gears clicking into place around my life. Every day felt like a new round of questions, signatures, statements, clarifications, and evidence reviews. It was like watching my past being dismantled piece by people who didn't know me, but somehow knew exactly what had been done to me. CID called me back for another interview on a gray Tuesday morning. The air was cold enough that my breath fogged as I crossed the parking lot toward the CID office. Inside, Agent Willis greeted me with the same calm expression as always, though I noticed a new folder on the table. Thicker than before. He slid it toward me. "This is the compiled evidence packet," he said. "You don't have to read it unless you want to, but I do need you to confirm the timeline." The packet contained everything: my medical reports from Womack, photos of my bruises, timestamps from my leave form, bus station footage showing me limping off the bus in Rock Hill, and statements from two neighbors who had heard yelling on the night of the attack. Willis pointed to this timeline chart. "You arrived at 1700. Paramedic records indicate no calls made from the residence. However, based on injury progression, the assault likely occurred between 1800 and 1930. My chest tightened. "That sounds right," I whispered. He nodded. "Your mother initially claimed you fell, but later statements contradicted that. She's now cooperating with both our office and the sheriff's department." My ribs ached, not from injury, but from the weight of remembering. He clicked on another screen. Now the voicemails. Hearing Rick's voice again sent a shiver down my spine. Every threat, every deliberate pause, every ounce of venom. "These will be presented in both hearings," Willis said. "They demonstrate escalation intent and coercive control." "Will I have to listen to them again?" I asked quietly. He didn't sugarcoat it. "Most likely, yes." I inhaled slowly, grounding myself the way Dr. Sloan taught me. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The air tasted sterile but steady. When the meeting ended, he handed me a printed schedule for the next step coordination between Army Legal FAP representatives and the county prosecutor. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. This was really happening. A process I couldn't control. A truth I couldn't hide. Later that week, I met with Captain Reeves from JAG, the Army's legal office. She had sharp eyes, a firm handshake, and the posture of someone who spent her life dismantling lies with quiet precision. "Specialist Marlowe." She began spreading out files across the table. "Our role is to support the civilian case. The assault happened off-post, so jurisdiction remains with South Carolina. But because you are active duty, the Army will provide full cooperation." She pointed to a page titled Expert Witness Request. "Major Ruiz has agreed to testify regarding your injuries. Her medical assessment undercuts the defense argument that your bruises could come from training." Hearing that made something inside me warm. "She said she would immediately," Reeves replied. "She submitted her statement the same day she was asked." I nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of that support. Reeves tapped her pen against the table. "Rick Fallon has retained counsel. They're attempting a common strategy in cases involving service members. She flipped to a transcript of the defense's preliminary statements. I read the line out loud. She's military, she fights, she bruises. Reeves's jaw tightened. They're implying your injuries were self-inflicted or sustained during routine training. That argument won't hold, not with the medical evidence. The bruises are patterned, repeated, deliberate. She leaned forward. Do not let his defense shake you. You did nothing wrong. I nodded again, this time with more steadiness. After the meeting, I walked back across the courtyard toward the barracks. The winter wind cut across my face sharp and bracing. I felt strangely grounded. My world had been built on silence for so long that having people talk openly about what happened still felt like stepping onto thin ice, but beneath that ice was something solid, something real. In the evenings, the court preparation became all-consuming. I practiced answering questions with Reeves. I reviewed my own timeline until I could recite it in my sleep. The hardest part wasn't the facts. It was hearing my own voice attached to things I had avoided saying out loud for years. When did he first hit you? Why didn't you report earlier? Why did you go back home? Reeves never judged my hesitation. She only said jurors trust humanity more than perfection. Whenever the stress got too heavy, Serena dragged me to the gym, not to push me physically, but to remind me my body could still move, still breathe, still exist without fear. One night, as we walked back from chow, she nudged my shoulder. You know you're doing something huge, right? I'm just surviving, I said. She shook her head. No, you're breaking the cycle. That's not surviving. That's fighting back. Her words stuck with me long after the night settled in. A few days before the hearing, Reeves arranged a call between me, the prosecutor, and the sheriff's office. The prosecutor, a woman named Karen Miles, spoke with quiet authority. We have what we need, she said. The medical testimony, the neighbor statements, the digital evidence, his voicemails alone are enough to demonstrate malice. I felt a shudder through my chest. Not fear. Something like disbelief, like someone taking the monster from under my bed and putting him under fluorescent lights where everyone could see he was real. There's one more thing, Miles added. Your mother signed a supplemental statement. My heart caught. What did she say? She confirmed she witnessed the assault. My breath froze. My mother. She told the truth. Finally. Even if it was late. Even if it was after everything fell apart. Hearing that felt like someone had pulled a knot loose inside my ribs. Not forgiveness. Not healing. Just release. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the faint glow of the streetlights outside the barracks window. My mind played every moment on loop, the front door slamming and Rock Hill Rick's hand gripping my hair, my mother's voice whispering, "Don't tell the army," the sound of his threats echoing from the projector speakers. All of it swirling together. And yet beneath the dread, something new pulsed quietly. A small, steady truth I wasn't expecting. He wasn't winning anymore. His story wasn't the only one being told. Mine was finally being heard. The army didn't promise me a happy ending, but they promised me justice, and for the first time in my life, I believed justice might actually be possible. The courthouse in York County smelled like old wood and cold air, the kind that seeps into your bones even when you are sitting perfectly still, and I remember thinking as I walked through the double doors that nothing about this place felt like freedom, even though everyone kept telling me this was the path to it. The fluorescent lights were too bright, the marble floors too loud, and the hallway seemed to stretch longer than any ruck march I had ever done. Captain Reeves walked beside me with her shoulders squared, and her voice calm as she reviewed the order of witnesses one last time, but I barely heard her. My pulse thudded in my ears, drowning out everything except the distant echo of a door closing somewhere behind me. When we reached the courtroom, I froze for half a second. Linda was already inside. She sat in the last row, hunched forward, fingers knotted together, trembling so visibly that for a moment I almost did not recognize her. Her hair looked thinner, her eyes swollen, her shoulders caved inward like she was trying to fold herself into a shape small enough to disappear. She did not look at me when I entered. She stared straight ahead, as if locking her gaze on the back wall could save her from the truth that had finally forced its way into the light. And then I saw him. Rick. standing with his lawyer at the defense table like he was attending a casual meeting, not a hearing about the night he nearly killed me. He wore a clean gray suit that did nothing to soften the hardness in his jaw. His hands were cuffed at the wrists, but he held himself like the cuffs were decorative, like none of this mattered, like he still believed he held the upper hand. The moment his eyes met mine, he smirked. It was small and sharp and filled with the same cold certainty he had breathed into my ear when he said no one would ever save me. I felt something inside me tighten, but I did not look away. Not this time, not ever again. The bailiff called the room to order. Everyone stood. The judge took his seat, and suddenly the world narrowed to a single point of tension as the proceedings began. The prosecutor, Karen Miles, stood first. Her voice carried a quiet force that made the entire room still itself. She began by laying out the facts of the case with a precision that felt like watching a surgeon work. She described the timeline of my leave, the injuries documented by Womack Army Medical Center, the statements collected by CID, and the pattern of behavior consistent with escalating domestic violence. Then she clicked a remote and the first evidence slide appeared on a monitor near the jury. A medical diagram showing bruising to the ribs and temple. She stepped closer, pointing gently at the image. "This is not a soldier's bruise," she said, her voice steady and ice-sharp. "This is a victim's bruise." A ripple moved through the jury box. Some leaned forward. Others drew their brows together. One older juror pressed a hand to his chest like something about that sentence had struck a nerve deep inside him. The defense attorney rose, almost immediately objecting to the characterization, but the judge overruled him. Miles continued. She explained the force required to create the pattern of bruising. She explained how the angles did not match a fall or a training injury. She explained why the marks on my arm could only come from someone gripping and pulling. And then she called Major Ruiz. Watching Ruiz walk to the stand felt like seeing a lighthouse appear through fog. She wore her dress uniform ribbons, neat posture, perfect gaze, steady as she took the oath. The defense attorney attempted to challenge her credibility by implying Army medical evaluations were biased in favor of soldiers seeking protective orders. Ruiz shut that down with one sentence. "My duty is not to take sides," she said. "My duty is to the truth written on the body." And the truth on this soldier's body was violence. The prosecutor guided her through every detail. Bruise depth, pattern, timing, likelihood, medical probability. Her testimony was clinical but compassionate, the exact balance I had felt the day she first examined me. When she finished, the defense attorney stood. His strategy was predictable. He tried to use my service against me. Specialist Marlowe is trained physically. She sustains bruises regularly. Is it not possible that these injuries are the result of normal military training? He paced slowly in front of the jury like he was revealing something clever. Ruiz did not blink. Absolutely not. These injuries could not have occurred during training. They are consistent with repeated strikes inflicted with intent. The jury took that in. I saw heads nod. The defense attorney hesitated, then changed tactics. He suggested I had exaggerated, misinterpreted, misremembered. He asked if stress could cause confusion, if the Army had pressured me, if I was angry at my mother for remarrying. He tried every angle except the truth. When he finally sat down, Miles walked forward again. She did not call another medical expert. She did not call another neighbor. She called me. My legs felt like they were made of sand as I walked toward the witness stand. The courtroom blurred, then sharpened again as I placed my hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. When I sat, I made the mistake of glancing back. Linda had both hands over her mouth. Rick leaned back in his chair, staring at me with a bored expression, like this entire trial was an inconvenience. Miles approached gently. Her voice was soft, almost conversational. "Specialist Marlowe, can you describe the night of July 18th in your own words?" My mouth went dry. I opened it. Nothing came out. The judge watched me carefully. The jury leaned in. Serena sat in the second row, jaw tight, eyes locked on me like she was holding me together by sheer will. So I forced myself to breathe. And I told them. I told them about the smell of whiskey, the slammed cabinet, the way Rick grabbed my hair, The moment his kick knocked breath from my lungs, I told them the truth I had swallowed for years. I did not cry. I did not shake. I did not shrink. I only spoke. When I finished, the prosecutor nodded gently and said no further questions. The defense attorney rose. His smile was thin. Specialist, you are trained to fight correct. Yes. You are trained to endure pain. Yes. So how can you be certain your injuries were caused by the defendant and not by your own training regimen? Because I wasn't training when he kicked me, I said. The room fell silent. He tried again. You could be mistaken about how the injuries occurred, no. You could be misremembering, no. You could be confused, no. My voice cut sharper each time. He stared at me, realizing too late that he had lost the jury. They had stopped watching him. They were watching me. And then, Miles pressed play on the evidence that sealed everything. Rick's voicemail. His voice poured out of the speakers, venomous and unmistakable. You think the Army will save you? You're mine. The jurors recoiled visibly. One woman shook her head. Another shut his eyes. When the audio ended, the silence was absolute. For the first time, Rick's expression slipped. The smirk vanished. His jaw clenched. His eyes darted around the room like he was searching for escape. He finally understood. He was not in control anymore. The judge recessed for deliberation. It took the jury less than an hour. When they returned, every pair of eyes landed on me. The foreman stood. We find the defendant guilty. My lungs flooded with air so suddenly it hurt. Rick exploded, shouting something I could not hear over the pounding in my ears as deputies restrained him. Linda sobbed into her hands, and I sat there trembling from head to toe, realizing something impossible. Justice did not feel like victory. It felt like release. When the verdict was read, I thought the hardest part was over, but sentencing day carved itself into my memory with a different kind of weight, heavier than anything that came before, because it did not rely on fear or survival. It relied on the slow and final machinery of justice, closing around a man who had controlled the narrative of my life for far too long. The courtroom was smaller this time, more intimate, more echoing the kind of space that forced everyone into proximity with truth, whether they wanted it or not. I sat in the front row beside Captain Reeves and Serena, my hands folded tight in my lap, my posture straight from years of muscle memory, but my heart pounding like I was back in a gas chamber during basic training. Linda was there too, but not behind me. She sat on the opposite side of the aisle, shoulders hunched, tissue crumpled between her fingers, her eyes dark hollows that seemed unable to settle on anything for more than a second. When Rick was brought and shackled at the wrists and ankles, I felt something in me react. Not fear, exactly. Not anymore, but a deep old instinct I'd carried since childhood, telling me to shrink, to vanish, to protect myself. But I didn't move. I held my place. I looked at him directly, meeting his eyes for the first time since the day he beat me to the floor of the kitchen. His expression flickered just for a breath between defiance and something else, something that looked almost like confusion, as if he still could not fathom that he was sitting in handcuffs while I sat free. Then the mask hardened again. The smirk returned, the same contempt that had been his signature for years. The judge called the room to order and asked the prosecution to present the formal recommendation. Miles stood gracefully flipping open a folder. She listed the severity of the assault, the pattern of coercive control, the documented history of emotional intimidation, the escalation captured on voicemails, the medical assessment by Major Ruiz, and the risk he posed to the victim were he to remain free. Then she said the words I had waited to hear without realizing it. The state recommends 5 years incarceration and a permanent no-contact order. Permanent. The word rattled through my bones. Permanent meant he could not reach me. He could not call, could not appear, could not stand on the porch waiting for me to come home, could not corner me in a kitchen ever again. The defense attorney rose and repeated the same tired arguments he had used in trial. She is a soldier. She bruises. She trains hard. She exaggerates. She misremembers, lies thin enough to see light through. Then he made one last attempt. He requested probation. Probation for the man who nearly crushed my ribs. For the man who whispered threats into my ear like promises. For the man who left me unconscious on a kitchen floor while my mother pretended I was simply clumsy. I stared straight ahead, willing my breath to stay steady. The judge addressed Rick directly. The room went silent except for the soft hum of the overhead lights. Mr. Fallon, he said, your actions demonstrate a sustained pattern of violence and intimidation toward a vulnerable member of your household. You inflicted physical harm, emotional distress, and continued coercion. The evidence presented leaves no question as to the intent behind your actions. He paused, picking up a document. Your lack of remorse is evident. I glanced at Rick. His face was blank jaw, flexing eyes flicking between the judge and me like he was calculating the weight of every word. The judge continued, therefore, it is the judgment of this court that you be sentenced to 5 years in state custody. My breath caught. It was real. It was happening. But the judge wasn't finished. Additionally, a lifetime no-contact order will be issued immediately. You are prohibited from contacting the victim directly, indirectly, or through any third party. Lifetime. My chest tightened, not with fear, not with panic, but with the first hint of something like air finally entering a place inside me that had been locked for almost a decade. Rick's composure cracked for the first time. His jaw clenched violently. His eyes widened red and sharp with the realization that the control he wielded like a weapon had evaporated the minute truth entered a courtroom. He leaned forward, starting to speak, but the deputies were already stepping in. His voice rose, then broke, then turned into a furious growl that was swallowed by the sound of chains shifting as he was pulled back. The judge struck the gavel once, motion denied. Sentence imposed. It was done. I didn't move. I didn't smile. I didn't collapse. I just sat there letting the reality seep into me like slow warmth after years of cold. Linda startled as Rick was led away, her breath escaping in a small, wounded sound. She stood halfway, reaching her hand out despite the cuffs holding him back. The moment the door closed behind him, she crumpled into the bench, sobbing into her shaking hands. Captain Reeves touched my arm lightly. "It's over," she said. My head turned just enough to see Serena nodding at me with fierce pride. But something inside me whispered that the story wasn't over yet. Not quite. The next wave came the following day. My phone buzzed with a number I knew by heart, even though I wished I didn't. Linda. I stared at it, unsure whether I should answer. I finally did, lifting it slowly to my ear. For a moment, I heard nothing but her breathing, fragile and uneven. Then her voice cracked through the line. "Tessa, please talk to me." I closed my eyes. "Mom," I said quietly. She inhaled sharply, like hearing my voice broke her open. "I didn't mean what I said," before she sobbed. "I was scared. I didn't know they would take him. I didn't know you would do this." That sentence twisted like an old knife in my stomach. "I didn't know you would do this. Not I didn't know he would do this to you. Not I didn't know how hurt you were. Not I didn't know I failed you. Just I didn't know you would do this." She continued, words tumbling over each other. "Tessa, I have no one now. You are my daughter. You have to help me. I need you." I held the phone tighter, my pulse thudding slow and heavy. She wasn't calling because she saw me. She wasn't calling because she understood. She was calling because her world collapsed and she wanted me to put it back together. The same way I had tried to do for years. The same way she expected me to do the night I lay unconscious on her kitchen floor. Something inside me, something tired and wounded and finally ready, rose to the surface. "No, Mom." Silence poured across the line, thick and stunned. "No," I repeated. I heard her inhale sharp and startled, like no one had ever told her that word before. "Mom, I can't help you. I can't carry this anymore. You chose him every time, and now I'm choosing myself." Her breathing grew quick and panicked. "Tessa, wait, please. Please, don't hang up." But I already knew what I had to do. For the girl I had been, for the soldier I was becoming, and for the future I finally saw opening like a doorway instead of a trap. "Goodbye, Mom." I hung up. My hand shook only once, then steadied. I stood by the barracks window watching the afternoon sun stretch across the concrete and felt a stillness settle into my chest, something quiet and strong, something like the first real breath of my adult life. Justice didn't feel like triumph. Justice felt like release. A release I had been waiting for since I was 13 years old, and for the first time ever, I wasn't looking back. 1 year after the sentencing, Fort Liberty felt like home in a way no place ever had not because everything was perfect, but because the world inside the gates finally felt like a life I had earned instead of a life I was running toward. My days were filled with training cycles, early morning PT counseling that had shifted from crisis intervention to real healing work in a quiet rhythm that steadied me in ways I never expected. I had learned how to breathe without pain, how to sleep without jumping at every noise, how to exist without the constant pressure of trying to survive inside someone else's anger. I thought the past was behind me, sealed by courtroom walls and chain-link fences, until the morning the past showed up at the exact place that had given me a future. It was a Saturday, humid and heavy, the kind of Carolina air that clung to your skin like an extra layer of clothing. I was walking back from the PX with a bag of toiletries in one hand when my phone buzzed with a text from Gate Security. Civilian requesting contact with you at All American Access Control Point. Name provided Linda Fallon. For a moment, the world tilted. I stared at the screen so long the text began to blur and sharpen again in cycles. I hadn't seen her in a year. I hadn't heard her voice since the day I hung up on her. I thought maybe she had moved on, built some version of a new life without him, without me, without the triangle of fear and guilt that held our home together for so many years. But people don't shed their patterns just because the world forces them to. They return to them like gravity, and gravity had finally dragged her back to me. I walked toward the gate because part of me needed to finish what had been left undone. The closer I got, the more the base transformed from familiar streets into a kind of emotional battlefield. The sounds of vehicles idling MPs, checking IDs, and the faint echo of cadence from a distant training field all blended into a dull hum under the pounding of my heart. When I reached the checkpoint, I saw her immediately. Linda stood outside the outer barrier where civilians waited before being allowed further. She looked small, smaller than I remembered, her shoulders hunched, arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold her body together. Her hair was thinner, her clothes slightly worn, her face lined in ways I didn't remember. As soon as she saw me, her hands flew to her mouth and her knees buckled like she might collapse. She stumbled forward until the MP held out a hand to stop her. "Ma'am, you cannot cross this line." Her eyes shot to me wet and frantic. "Tessa." Her voice cracked like something brittle snapping under weight. "Baby, please, please talk to me." I took a slow breath, grounding myself the way Dr. Sloan taught me. The fence stood between us, tall and quiet, its metal grid catching the sunlight in sharp lines. I stepped just close enough that she could hear me, but not close enough for her to reach through. "Mom, why are you here?" The question came out steadier than I expected. She took a shaky breath. "I have no one left." Her fingers trembled against her chest. "You're all I have. Please, please don't turn your back on me." I stared at her, feeling something old rise in my chest. Not anger, not grief. Something deeper, something colder. The part of me that spent 13 years carrying her fear like it was my duty. The part of me that protected her from the monster she chose to live with. The part of me that learned to survive by folding myself into whatever shape she needed to keep the peace. That part didn't speak this time. The soldier in me did. The woman who survived did. The woman who no longer apologized for existing did. "Mom, you chose him." I said it quietly, but the words cut sharper than anything I had ever said to her. She froze her face, draining of color. I let the silence stretch just long enough for the truth to settle. And now, I choose myself. Her mouth opened, then closed again as tears spilled down her cheeks. She reached forward on instinct fingers inches from the fence line. "Please." I didn't know what else to do. I didn't know how to leave. I didn't know how to be alone. I shook my head, feeling something inside me settle into place with a certainty I had never known. "Mom, you were never alone. You had me. You just didn't want me, not the way I needed you to." She sobbed so loudly the MP shifted uncomfortably, glancing between us like he wasn't sure whether to intervene or look away. Her voice cracked again. "I can't survive without you." I felt the weight of that sentence, the guilt she had used my entire childhood pressing against old bruises that had never fully healed. Only this time, the weight didn't stick. I exhaled slowly. "You survived without me every time you looked away, Mom. Every time you let him hurt me. Every time you chose silence instead of safety. Every time you asked me to stay quiet so your world wouldn't crack. And now that it has cracked, you want me to hold it together." I paused. "I can't do that anymore." She shook her head wildly, tears dripping off her jaw. "Tessa, please. I love you. You're my daughter." That word, daughter, hit me like a memory of something I never really had. My voice softened but stayed firm. "Loving someone means protecting them." "You never protected me." She choked on a sob. "I was afraid. You know how he was. You know what he would have done to me." I nodded once. "Yes. And you let him do it to me instead." She staggered back like I had struck her, her face twisting in pain. For a brief moment, I felt the familiar urge to comfort her, to fix it, to apologize for hurting her feelings, even though she had hurt me far worse. But that urge didn't control me anymore. I wasn't her shield. I wasn't her excuse. I wasn't her emotional caretaker. I was simply her daughter in biology and nothing else. The MP stepped forward gently. "Ma'am, you're going to need to step back from the fence." She ignored him completely, reaching toward me through the metal grid. "Please, let me in. Let me talk to you. Let me fix this." I straightened, lifting my chin the way I did when receiving commands or delivering them. "You can't fix this. Not because I won't let you. Because you never tried when it mattered." Her knees buckled and she grabbed the fence for support. "I can change. People change." I shook my head. "Not when they only change because they have nowhere else to go." Her sobbing turned sharp hysterical and the MP made eye contact with the gate supervisor. 2 additional security personnel approached quietly. "Ma'am, we need to ask you to leave the premises. You're causing a disturbance." Her eyes widened in panic. She looked at them, then back at me. "Tessa, please don't let them take me away. You're all I have left." My chest tightened, not with guilt this time, but with certainty. I stepped back from the fence, creating just enough distance that the message was unmistakable. "I am not responsible for you." Her face broke completely, her shoulders collapsing inward. The MPs gently took her by the arms, not roughly, not forcefully, but firmly enough that she could no longer lunge toward me. She didn't fight them. She didn't resist. She simply cried, the sound thin and childlike. The sound of a woman who finally realized the consequences of years of choosing the wrong person and expecting the right one to carry the fallout. As they escorted her toward the parking area, she twisted once more to look at me. The last words she spoke came out in a whisper barely strong enough to travel across the space. "Please don't do this." I held her gaze until she disappeared behind the MP truck. Then I exhaled. Slowly, fully, completely. For the first time, it didn't hurt. The wind moved across the base in a warm current brushing against my sleeves. A formation ran past in the distance, cadence echoing faintly through the air. Life on post continued without pause, steady and predictable, leaving no space for the chaos of my past to root itself here. I stood alone at the gate for another minute, letting the quiet settle into my bones. Something inside me felt clean, like a wound that had finally scabbed over and would in time become nothing more than a scar reminding me of what I survived. I turned away from the fence and walked back toward the life I had built with my own hands. I didn't look back. The first thing I noticed in the months after everything ended was that my breathing changed, not in a sudden dramatic way, but in the slow truth of waking up one morning and realizing I was inhaling without bracing for impact, without waiting for a voice to rise behind me or a footstep to harden the air. Freedom did not arrive with trumpets or applause. It arrived in small, ordinary moments, like the morning I jogged across Longstreet Road at Fort Liberty and realized my chest felt open instead of tight, Or the afternoon I sat in the PT field stretching after a run and felt my muscles relax instead of coil. Life did not become perfect, but it became mine. My days filled with structure and purpose again, the kind that gave me enough discipline to shape my future and enough space to breathe inside it. I completed another cycle of counseling with Dr. Sloan. Our sessions shifting from crisis survival to rebuilding to understanding how years of being trapped inside someone else's violence had taught my nervous system to expect storms even in clear weather. She taught me how to recognize the difference between danger and memory, how to release tension from my shoulders when I caught myself shrinking, how to stand in a room without scanning for exits. She said something once that stayed with me. Safety is not the absence of fear, it is the presence of choice. For the first time, I had choices, real ones, and they stretched out in front of me like a road I was finally allowed to walk. My sergeant pulled me aside one morning after PT, the sky still bruised purple from sunrise, and told me quietly that my name had been submitted for Air Assault School. He said it in a matter-of-fact tone, but his eyes held something warmer, something proud. I felt a shock of disbelief before excitement took over sharp and electric. Air assault, ropes, towers, helicopters, the training that demanded strength, precision grit, and relentless focus. A year earlier, I had been lying on a kitchen floor, gasping for air. Now the Army believed I was strong enough to soar. I spent the next weeks preparing, pushing myself carefully but consistently, building endurance, sharpening technique training in ways that made me feel the kind of alive I didn't know I was missing. My ribs no longer ached when I ran. My lungs no longer tightened when I heard raised voices around the barracks. I was becoming someone new, someone I would have never believed existed when I was 13 or 16 or even 21, when I thought survival was the peak of my potential. My battle buddies became my real family, not inherited by blood, but earned through sweat trust and shared nights in the field when the world felt both enormous and simple. Serena especially. She checked on me without checking on me, dropping an energy drink on my bunk on days she could tell I was tired, pulling me into conversations in the DFAC, so I wouldn't slip into old habits of silence, dragging me to weekend volleyball games, even when I pretended not to care. She once told me offhand and casual that the Army didn't just save my life. It gave me people who knew how to hold it without breaking it. I laughed then, but it stayed with me the way real truths do. The further I moved from my old life, the more I saw how tightly it had once wrapped around my throat. The guilt fading, the reflexive apologizing, easing away, the fear dissolving like fog burned off by sun. My mother never tried to come back again. Not once. After the day she stood outside the Fort Liberty gate, sobbing into her hands as security escorted her away, a silence settled between us, the kind that comes not from avoidance, but from finality. I did not hate her. I did not wish her pain. I simply wished her well from a distance that felt healthy, necessary, and deserved. Some wounds require distance to heal. Some relationships require endings instead of repairs. I carried the grief of that truth quietly, the way a soldier carries weight in a ruck close to the body but no longer controlling it. On the morning I received my official slot for Air Assault School, I sat on my bunk, staring at the orders printed in clean black ink, feeling a kind of gratitude that almost hurt. Not gratitude for the suffering, but for the survival, for the chance to build something stronger from the pieces, for the chance to fly in ways I had never imagined when I was a girl with bruised arms and whispered fears. Training for air assault pushed me harder than anything I had faced before. 12-mile rucks, rope climbs that burned my palms, tower descents that forced trust into gravity and technique. Every day felt like a conversation between the old me who once lived afraid of noise in the hallway and the new me who leaned forward into challenge instead of away from it. At graduation, they placed wings in my hand, small and silver cool to the touch, and I remember closing my fingers around them and thinking, this is what reclaiming your life feels like. Not loud, not dramatic, just true, just earned. As months passed, I built routines that grounded me. Evening runs along the perimeter road, weekends spent exploring Fayetteville, buying fresh coffee from a small veteran-owned shop downtown. Writing in a journal, Dr. Sloan encouraged me to keep documenting the small shifts in my thinking, the subtle changes in how my body reacted to stress. I began to sleep deeper, eat better, laugh more. I started to trust my own strength, not the borrowed kind that comes from enduring pain, but the real kind that grows from choosing your future every single day. Sometimes I walked past the family housing area on post and saw kids riding bicycles while their parents grilled dinner or washed cars, and a small part of me grieved the childhood I never had. But a bigger part of me felt something else: hope. The knowledge that one day when I built a family of my own, it would be nothing like the home I grew up in. It would be quiet, safe, whole, built on love instead of fear. One cool autumn evening, just as the light was fading and the sky blushed orange over the long barracks buildings, I walked alone toward the quad outside my company. The air smelled like pine and distant smoke from a training exercise. Soldiers laughed somewhere behind me, their voices echoing across the pavement. The flag at the headquarters building rustled softly in the breeze. The world felt steady, grounded, balanced. I paused in front of my barracks, hands in my pockets, breathing in the peace that had taken me years to find. The same place that had once received me, bruised, limping, shaking, was now the place where I stood tall, whole, strong, alive. For a long moment, I stayed there, letting everything settle inside me: the past, the pain, the justice, the freedom, the growth, the knowledge that I had walked through fire and emerged not untouched, but unbroken. I looked at the horizon above the tree line, a soft line of gold where the day lingered. I thought about the girl I had been and the woman I had become, and I felt something rare, something profound: peace. Not the fragile kind that breaks when the wind shifts, but the solid kind that lives in your bones when you finally understand your worth. I lifted my chin, breathing deeply, the air cool and clean. For the first time in my life, I felt completely, unquestionably safe. For the first time ever, I was home. And as I stood there in front of the barracks at Fort Liberty, the place that had witnessed my breaking and my mending, I knew the truth with absolute clarity. My story did not end in that kitchen. It began here. There are stories that end in the middle of a whisper, stories that never get told, stories that stay buried under years of silence because someone somewhere convinced you that your pain was too inconvenient, too disruptive, too shameful to be spoken aloud. And if you grew up in a home where fear lived in the walls, where tiptoeing felt safer than standing tall, where apologies spilled out of your mouth before you even understood what you were apologizing for, then you know exactly how heavy that silence can be. You know the weight of memories you were taught not to remember. You know the sting of wishing things were different and then punishing yourself for wishing at all. And for so many people, especially those who learned how to endure long before they learned how to breathe, the idea of freedom feels more like a dream than something you can hold. But then one day, something shifts. Maybe it is a moment, maybe a sentence, maybe a single decision that feels small on the surface, yet massive in the center of your chest. Maybe it is the day you realize you no longer owe anyone your silence. Maybe it is the day you see yourself clearly enough to understand you deserve a life where your heart is not on high alert. Maybe it is the day you say no and mean it. Or maybe it is the day you pick up the few pieces of hope you have left and walk toward a future you are not sure how to imagine yet. Leaving a toxic home is not just leaving a place. It is leaving a version of yourself you never chose to become. It is stepping out of patterns built by people who were supposed to love you. It is walking away from the familiarity of pain because you finally realize that comfort should not hurt. And the truth is, healing does not arrive all at once. Healing arrives in small breaths, in softer mornings, in moments when you look in the mirror and recognize the strength in your own eyes. Healing arrives the day you stop blaming yourself for the choices other people made. Healing arrives the day you understand that survival was not weakness. Survival was brilliance. Survival was courage. Survival was you staying alive long enough to glimpse a different life. Some people will not understand your journey. They will say, you exaggerated, you misunderstood, you overreacted. You should have stayed. You should have forgiven, you should have gone back. You should have kept quiet. They say this because your courage unsettles the part of them still afraid to face their own truth. Do not let their fear shrink your voice. Do not let their denial erase your pain. And do not let their judgment dim the light you fought to create. You are not responsible for convincing anyone of what you lived through. You are not required to justify your escape. You are not obligated to carry the version of the story that made others comfortable. Your only responsibility is to yourself and to the life you are building now. If you are still in the early stages of healing, know this. It is okay if you are still tired. It is okay if you still flinch at loud voices. It is okay if certain smells take you back to places you never wanted to revisit. It is okay if some days feel harder than others. Healing is not linear. Healing is not neat. Healing does not follow a calendar. Healing is a slow, patient rebuilding of trust in yourself, in your decisions, in your ability to choose differently than the people who hurt you. And if you have reached a place where your peace is steady, where you can breathe without fear, tightening around your ribs, where you can stand in your own skin without shrinking, then you already know that the quiet strength you carry now did not come from nowhere. It came from every moment you kept going when you could have given up. It came from every time you said nothing in order to survive, and then eventually learned to speak again because survival was no longer enough. It came from every step forward, even when your past tried to pull you back. You earned your peace. You fought for it. You built it. And someone watching this right now might be standing exactly where you once stood, torn, afraid, unsure if freedom is worth the fallout. They might be living a life that mirrors the shadows of your old one. They might be questioning whether they deserve something better. They might be wondering if anyone will believe them or if anyone will care. And this is where your story matters. Not the prettiest parts, not the polished parts, not the parts that make people comfortable. Your truth. The real truth holds the power to reach someone who thinks they are alone. The power to whisper that leaving is possible, that healing is possible, that life after chaos is not only real but worth fighting for. You never know who needs to hear that someone else walked through fire and made it out whole. You never know who is waiting for one sign, one sentence, one echo of courage to take their first step towards safety. When you share the moment you broke free, you offer someone else a map. When you share the moment you stopped choosing the people who hurt you, you show someone else that they can choose differently too. When you share the moment you looked at your life and said, "Never again," you remind someone else that they have that power as well. You are not alone in what you survived, and you do not have to be alone in what you are becoming. Your voice is heavier than you think. Your story is louder than you realize, and your strength, quiet or fierce, steady or trembling, is enough to inspire someone who is still standing in the doorway between fear and freedom. So take a breath. Look at how far you have come. Look at the life you are building from the ashes of the one that tried to break you. And if you feel ready, if you feel willing, if you feel called, then share your story. Not for validation, not for sympathy, not for attention. Share it because it might reach someone who has never been told that survival is not the end of their life, but the beginning of it. Someone out there might be waiting to hear your voice so they can finally find their own. If you ever broke free from a toxic home, share your story. Someone might need your courage today.